Welcome to In the Loop with Larry. Today, we're going to discuss with Larry net access metering 3.0 or NEM 3.0, which is alive and well in California, and really how that compares to net metering 2.0 or what we currently know. And we'll talk a little bit about an update on the tariffs, the Asia tariffs. So, welcome, Larry.
Thank you, Warren.
Yeah. So, Larry, currently, just to give everybody some context and an understanding really quickly about net metering 2.0, or as we know, net metering now in most of our states. And if you want to watch a video, we'll have a link in the description below where we did a deeper dive into net metering. But the basic concept of net metering as we know it today is that when your system is producing more than you're currently using, you send that kilowatt hours or those kilowatt hours back to the grid, and you have a bank, and your bank will either continue to grow as you send more kilowatt hours into the bank, or at night or in the wintertime, when you take kilowatt hours out of the bank, you get to use it. And generally speaking, it's a one-to-one exchange. So when you send a kilowatt hour to the grid and you take it back, there's no loss, and you get to use the kilowatt hours that you produce just at a different time. Essentially, you get to use the grid as your storage for a nominal fee, that customer fee. But you get to take the same advantage if you're paying 12 cents or 20 cents a kilowatt hour. You get to take advantage of that 20 cents per kilowatt hour, whether you use it now or when the sun's shining, or whether you use it at night when there's no sun at all. So, Larry, that's pretty much net metering as we know it now. What exactly is NEM 3.0?
Yeah, so there's actually three types of net metering currently. So the typical net meter is what we call it, where what we experience in virtually all of our states right now, is where, exactly like you said, where the value of solar that you send back to the grid is exactly the same as the cost of electricity that you use. NEM 2.0 in California, which was before NEM 3.0, was where you would get slightly less for power that you overproduced. But now NEM 3.0 is a massive shift from NEM 2.0, where you get significantly less for overproduction than what you pay for electricity coming in. And that's more like the cost of generation, which is much lower than what you pay for your electricity.
And that is at any time. You're not talking about, Larry, overproducing over a 1 year period. You're talking about if you overproduce now when the sun is shining, anything going back to the grid, you're going to get compensated at a substantially lower rate.
Yep, typical household is going to see their usage spike in the morning and in the evening, and solar production is going to be in the middle of the day. So it's not a great fit from that perspective, because you're going to be pushing a lot of power out during the day, using a lot of power in mornings and evenings.
All right, so let's talk about why net metering or NEM 3.0.
So the reason why utilities are starting to go this direction is, the typical cost of a kilowatt hour includes generation, distribution, and transmission on the residential side.
Yeah.
Commercial, the cost structure is a little bit different, but typically in the residential side, when you're paying, 15, 18, 20 cents per kilowatt hour, that includes generation, transmission, and distribution. NEM 3.0 credits are based on the avoided cost, which a simple way to put that is generation rate only. And if you look at it in a certain way, that kind of makes sense, because your solar production, your solar system is only producing power. It's not distributing it or transmitting it to other locations. So you still have to use the utilities poles and wires to get that kilowatt hour to somewhere else. Now, on the flip side of that, if it just goes to my neighbor down the street, that's not a high cost to the utility. So in that case, I should get more than just the generation rate, because I'm producing it on site or very close to the load. So you could look at it a couple different ways, but essentially what the utility is saying is, look, we've got to maintain our poles and wires, so therefore we're only going to pay you for the generation rate.
Right. So on a typical residential bill, there's those three charges: the customer charge, just for being a customer, that's usually $8 or $10, $12 a month. There's the distribution costs, and that's for the infrastructure, the transformers, the poles, the wires. And then there's the actual cost of the electricity, the transmission or the generation. And that is what, as we know, net metering today in other states, your solar production is covering all of those costs.
Hmm.
And now they're moving to say that, hey, the only cost that solar should cover when you send it back to the grid is the actual cost of the electricity.
Right, right.
You could also argue what the customer charges for, but in that scenario, but I don't think we need to get too deep into an argument over that at this point. Great. All right. So, how does it affect California folks who want to go solar?
Yeah, so the effects are significant. The great thing is existing projects are grandfathered in for 20 years. And even if you buy a house with solar that's grandfathered in, you get that net metering for 20 years. So having installed solar a year ago or earlier this year, you're in a great position. In general, the new project paybacks will extend from an estimated 5 years to an estimated 9 years in California. That's super estimated. There's a ton of variables there, but at a very basic level, it extends the payback because the benefit of the kilowatt hours is less than it was before. Now, energy storage in this case can actually reduce payback time. And what this means is that probably the majority of projects installed in California going forward will most likely include energy storage, because now, instead of pushing that kilowatt hour back to the utility at 10 cents, you can store it and you can use it when rates are at 40 cents. So there's a huge benefit to storage. Um, the the industry as a whole is going to slow in California, but I think it's going to rebound, and I think it's going to rebound with energy storage.
So, as with most things, Larry, things start in California and they seem to trickle their way out to the rest of the country. Are you seeing NEM 3.0 start to proliferate in other states?
Yeah, so this is what I wanted to talk about next, Warren. And that is how does this affect the industry?
Yeah,
Um, so one of the big effects right now is a smaller residential installation market in the U.S. California is a huge part of the U.S. residential market, so there's a smaller market. Obviously, it's not really affecting us because we're not in California, but as overall in the U.S., it's affecting the market. And to your point, in solar, as California goes, so goes the rest of the U.S. eventually. So we're probably going to see this in more states at some point. One of the things that I would say is if you have net metering in your state, I would recommend taking advantage of it. I'm not expecting these changes to come to, Pennsylvania, for example, next year, but they might come in the next 5 years. Certainly in the next decade, you would think. So if you have net metering available in your state, take advantage of it. And my guess is that in most cases, those customers that take advantage of it will be grandfathered in when changes come. That's a lot of what we see in the solar industry.
great. So, you can take a sigh of relief if you already have solar and you have a net metering agreement with your utility company. But if you don't and you're thinking about going solar, now's probably a better time than ever to get an agreement with the utility company and take advantage of net metering as we know it today.
Right, and we are seeing co-ops make changes, Warren. The investor-owned utilities, the main utilities that are under the state's PUC aren't making those changes yet because they have to go through the PUC for that. But co-ops, we're seeing in Pennsylvania, Ohio, they're starting to make changes, adjust their net metering a little bit here and there.
Super. All right, let's switch gears for a second, Larry, and talk about the Southeast Asia solar tariff. NPR recently put out this article. The U.S. imports most of its solar panels. A new ruling may make that more expensive. And it was updated in August of this year. What exactly is going on here?
So, probably over a decade ago, I think it was in the early 2010s, when Obama was president, there was a tariff put on solar coming out of China. China was dumping solar panels into the U.S. below cost. It was a real problem. So the U.S. put tariffs on modules coming from China. Those module manufacturers in China responded very quickly by moving manufacturing, as you can see in this article, into other Southeast Asian countries. And they got away with it for some time until recently. Yeah, there you see Vietnam, Malaysia, Thailand, Cambodia, and that's where about 80% of our modules are coming from in the US right now. Now, you can say what you want about tariffs. There's varied opinions on this, but we are seeing right now in Europe, for example, where there are no tariffs, there's going to be a lot of bloodshed in the solar module manufacturing market, because module prices are just dropping dramatically because China continues to dump modules into Europe below cost. So, there's opinions on both sides, but that's the reality of the history of it. And then as this article states, they're Oxen Solar, a U.S. manufacturer, basically said, hey, these module manufacturers just moved their capacity in other Southeast Asian countries. They're doing the exact same thing. We need to put the tariff on those countries as well. And there was talk of retroactive tariffs of up to like 240%. Anyone in the industry knows that if you have potential for retroactive tariffs of up to 240%, that's going to stop sales immediately because you don't know what's going to happen.
Sure.
And so fortunately for the industry, less fortunately for manufacturers, but as an installer, fortunately for us, Biden stepped in and said no tariffs for 2 years. This was back in 2022. So that gave us, room to breathe, hopefully time to get manufacturing into the U.S. And get some of that manufacturing up and running, which obviously is going to take some time. But now that's coming to an end. So we're looking at summer of 2024. That's going to come to an end. And as you'll see in this article, they ruled for U.S. manufacturing and against Southeast Asian manufacturing. Now there are, and I don't think it's mentioned in this article, but there are 3 companies that they said will not be facing tariffs that are clean. That's Hanwha Q Cells, Jinko Solar, and Boviet Solar. And then on the flip side of that, New East Solar, Trina Solar, Canadian Solar, and a number of others will be tariffed, most likely here starting next summer. So that's kind of the quick overview, Warren. A lot of potential updates and changes as we go along here, but that's kind of where we're at today.
Yeah, and there's no talk or discussions that you're aware of this being extended, the hold on the tariffs.
Yeah, there's a little bit of talk about it, but not a lot.
Okay.
And I know, the last time Biden made the decision, Congress tried to end it. Congress actually voted against it, and then Biden vetoed that, and Congress was unable to get enough votes to overrule Biden's veto. So it's politically divisive. It's divisive in the solar industry, manufacturers versus installers, but it's also politically divisive. This is not a clear-cut issue, and so it's hard to tell what's going to happen.
Yeah, but the issue dovetails with the domestic content adder of the IRA bill as well. I mean, obviously, as we know now that there's so many challenges surrounding domestic content, but nonetheless, the domestic content adder is driving companies to start manufacturing here in the United States. And I suspect that we'll see more manufacturing here in the coming years, and hopefully there'll be enough time for that transition to occur before tariffs going back into place.
Yeah, I think that's the challenge that we're going to face, is that there's not going to be enough of U.S. manufacturing ramped up quickly enough that if this tariff goes into effect next year, we're still going to need a lot of product from Southeast Asia until U.S. manufacturing ramps up.
Yeah, most certainly. Super. Well, thank you, Larry. This is very insightful. Appreciate your input on this, and we'll talk to you again next month.
All right. Thank you, Warren.
Thanks.